Thank you to the section. This is really my ABA home. I've been practicing trust and estates litigation since 1992 and have been a participant and an active involved person with the section virtually since the very beginning of my participation. Um, and I'm going to have each of the panelists introduce themselves, but I'll start by just giving a brief introduction of myself before we try to give you some information that we hope you will find useful, beneficial, and thought-provoking for the future. As I said, I've been doing trust and estate litigation since 1992. I was a former uh, chair of this diversity committee for RIPID, I think as we were transitioning from diversity to the name Diversity and Inclusion. And I now serve on the ACTEC, the American College of Trust and Estates Council's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusivity Committee. I am the chair of that committee when we just added equity to our name this past summer as we were also preparing an anti-racism statement. That's the quick overview, and what I wanted to let you know before I go further is that I discovered a few years ago that my great-great-great-great-grandfather, who was a white farmer in Florida, owned my great-great-great-grandmother, but he did a will that set her free and their 8 kids and their 6 grandkids, and they had to make their way to freedom. And what I have learned from the process of uncovering that story is that they did something anti-racist. They took a step against what existed as a racist law that prohibited the emancipation of slaves in the state of Florida, and did a will that made sure that they made their way to freedom in Illinois. And that's prompted me to continue to think about how we can continue to be anti-racist in all the things that we do, whether that's trust and estates, real estate, or other areas. So I'm going to hand it over to, let's see, why don't we start with Danielle, have her introduce herself and tell us who you are, and we can get into the conversation soon after that.
Great. Well, hello, everyone. My name is Danielle Carr, and I'm celebrating my 5-month anniversary as Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for Lowenstein Sandler. I'm based in their New Jersey office. Although my tenure with Lowenstein is brief, I've been doing diversity inclusion work for more than 2 decades. Prior to doing diversity inclusion work, I was a practicing attorney in Chicago, where I had the pleasure of meeting with Lindsay Dates when he was just a baby lawyer. And I look forward to the conversation today. One thing that I trust all know and appreciate is that the needle hasn't moved a lot since I was a lawyer in the 80s. And we're hopeful that today we can provide you guys with insight and tools that can be used to actually help get the legal profession where it should be today.
And next, let's go with O'Kelly McWilliams. Why don't you tell us who you are and what your background is so we can get into the discussion soon thereafter.
Thank you very much, Terry. Can you hear me?
Just fine.
Great. I just want to thank you, but particularly Kelly Clark, for the invitation to serve on the panel. Quite frankly, I've learned and benefited more in some of our prep sessions that has really been really helpful, and I think will help us continue to move and push the ball forward. Just quickly, my name is O'Kelly Edward McWilliams III, and if you ever decide to reach out to me later, I'll be happy to give you a little historical perspective on that name. Trust me, it's very interesting to tell. But I'm a partner at Mintz, and we used to be Mintz 11, Lofsky, and a whole bunch of other names, but they decided to shorten it to Mintz because of the branding. So now I'm at Mintz. I've been a partner there almost 3 years. I was there 3 years. I probably was there another 5 years before. I'm a boomerang. And I practice in the areas of employment, mainly the employment aspects of mergers and acquisitions and other corporate transactions. And the bulk of my clients are hedge funds, private equity, and publicly traded companies doing executive benefits and some of the M&A work. So I am honored and thrilled to be here. Just a couple of quick things in my background that might prove helpful as we discuss. Currently, I serve as the chair of the Virginia Retirement System Pension Fund, which is a pension fund of over $88 billion. And I serve as one of 9 trustees, and the governor appointed me as chair. And second, I used to serve on the ABA Board of Governors. I was fortunate to serve when Dennis Archer became the first African-American president of the ABA, and also serve as Robert Gray followed him as well. So I've had the benefit of, let's just say, getting some knowledge and sharing some of the huge titans of diversity, if you will.
Great. And now our third panelist on this discussion is Lindsay Dates. Why don't you introduce yourself, Lindsay?
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the invitation. I'm honored to be here with everyone today. I'm Lindsay Dates. I am a litigation partner in the Chicago office of Barnes & Thornburg. I do trial work by day, and during the pandemic, I've had quite a bit of commentary related to issues pertaining to race. With respect to diversity, equity, and inclusion, I have served in several leadership roles in the city, including most recently being the immediate past chair of the Chicago Committee on Minorities in Large Law Firms, which focuses on improving diversity within large law firms in Chicago. Personally, I also, as a mid-level associate years ago, experienced many of my friends and colleagues who were diverse let go during the last economic recession. So I'm really passionate about this issue, in part because of that experience, and in part because the same thing is happening today. So I look forward to talking with you all.
Thanks, Lindsay. It's a great panel, and I know that Reginald Turner is now here. I know that this is a diversity inclusion program, so if Mr. Turner has a few words he'd like to offer us, I think that would still be helpful. I think that was slotted into our time frame, so if you have a moment and can turn on, that's great. So let's go on with our discussion. We were going to start with a little bit of discussion about sort of setting the stage for the conversation. You know, what is diversity? What are we talking about? And I know that in my experience, I've seen us go from a discussion about integration or anti-discrimination, and then concerns about what becomes reverse racism, moving forward to a stage where we talk about diversity quite a bit, and that sort of broadened into inclusivity. And now I think a lot of organizations are adding equity, or the idea of really focusing on equity as a part of what we are called to do. I wondered, O'Kelly, if you had any thoughts or reactions, and so the panelists know, so the audience knows, we decided to make this as much of a free-flowing discussion as possible. So I'm encouraging everybody to chime in with any of the topics that we're talking about, but I'm just gonna give a few prompts, and these people know exactly what's going on, so it won't take much prompting. O'Kelly, did you have anything or any thoughts that you wanted to add on the idea of what is diversity and what does it mean for us?
Yeah, thank you again for the prompt. And feel free, my fellow panel members, I love to hear them kind of weigh in, or if there's any comments in the chat room as well, because the reality of it is that when you talk about diversity, inclusion, and equity, what you're looking at is that I had to break it down really in 3 different terms and 3 different definitions. You just can't roll it into one. And so when you think about diversity, as I began exploring these definitions, diversity includes, and it's not limited to race and color, it includes ethnicity, nationality, religion, socioeconomic status, veteran status, education, marital status, language, age, gender expression, gender identity, sexual orientation, mental or physical disability, genetic information, learning style, and even political perspectives as well. So diversity, as you can tell, is a very broad term. Now, if you think, as Terry mentioned earlier, if I think about probably 15 years ago, because diversity was sort of born out of that EEOC term law, it was really focused on race and ethnicity. But over the last 10 to 15 years, it's become a much broader term and encompasses all of the things I mentioned, and probably a few more that I haven't even addressed yet. The second,
Terry, can I jump in real quick?
Please do, Daniel.
I agree with everything that O'Kelly said, but I've kind of expanded it even a little bit more. And when in the work that I do, I kind of look at it in the sense of underrepresentation. There are a lot of different people that are in attendance today. Some may be at some small firms. It could be like minority-owned firms. And so when you're trying to make sure that you have different perspectives, you need to tap into whatever it is you're missing. So if it's all women, add some men. If it's, you know, all white people, add some people of color. And so you just want a well-rounded group of individuals that you're working with and helping your clients resolve matters that have different perspectives. So it shifts depending on where you're at, how it's defined.
Yeah. I think that's a great point. And that's a great lead into the next term, equity. And equity, that's the guarantee of fair treatment, access, opportunity, and advancement for all striving to identify and eliminate barriers that have prevented the full participation of some underrepresented groups. One example I like to think about, and I toss this out, is that Equal Pay for Women campaign. Which was based in part, as you know, because women have historically been underpaid and underrepresented in executive roles. So if you think about equity, that's a great example of the equity aspect of it. And then inclusion, where you have deliberately bringing traditionally excluded individuals and or groups into processes, activities, or decision or policy making in a way that shares power, again, that shares power, and ensures equal access to opportunities and resources. So as I kind of took a look at this, I've studied a number of different diversity professionals, Verna Myers being one, also the Chief Diversity Officer, Robert Sellers at the University of Michigan. And I thought it gave a great example, what they liken diversity, equity, and inclusion to. Think about this. Diversity, if you were thinking about attending a dance, diversity is where everyone is invited to the party. Equity means that everyone gets to contribute to the playlist. So you got to have a couple of Sting songs because he's awesome and I love him, and that's what I would contribute. And then inclusion means that everyone has the opportunity to dance. So if you think about inclusion, just imagine from a disability standpoint, if you've encouraged someone because of diversity to attend a party, this person has a disability, they're in a wheelchair. Equity, they contributed some songs to the playlist so they can attend. So they're ready to attend the dance. But from the inclusion perspective, guess what? We don't have access to any, we don't have any, we're not wheelchair accessible. So therefore, even though they've been included, they've been invited, they can't get access because we haven't removed the barriers in place to allow them to be able to be included. So that gives you a little bit in terms of as we define diversity, equity, inclusion. Let me jump to a second piece of all of this, and that is, let's reverse engineer it. What does that look like? When you look at organizations, employers, nonprofits, government agencies as well, you look at some of the strong characteristics that make up an inclusive organization, or at least help you start to move that way. Let me run down a few, and I'll try to be brief. One, it accepts diversity and inclusion as a way of life, and it starts at the top. So in an inclusive organization, one sees diversity at every level of the institution, okay? So that means if you have C-suite individuals, SVPs, VPs, or other leaders in an organization, you can look on your leadership and see diverse individuals leading different departments. In addition to that, individuals who have come together and they coordinate to achieve one common goal. Another one, it evaluates individual and group performance on the basis of observable and measurable behaviors and competencies. So we try to eliminate a lot of those subjective kind of analysis that go with that as well. Number three, it operates under transparent policies and procedures. Need I say more? Number four, it is consistent in its interactions with everyone. We talk about consistencies, and that's also a great HR and employment practice. Number five, it creates and maintains a learning culture. So you have ongoing training to make sure you're equipping all of your employees, your managers, to kind of embrace this workplace culture and what the management have kind of rolled down from the top. It has a comprehensive and easily accessible system of conflict resolution at all areas. So if there is conflict, there's a structured system to, again, promote, help, and achieve consistent results. It recognizes that it's part of the community that it serves, and we'll talk a little bit about that, that you're not alone. There's the kind of interior and exterior diversity aspects that we'll talk about as well. And then it lives according to its core values. And the final point I would just kind of make is that it accepts and embraces change. It doesn't resist it. So Terry, I guess those are just some things I wanted to throw out. The panel can kind of chew it up a little bit, as well as any of the participants.
And thanks, O'Kelly. Before I ask the rest of the panelists if they'd like to chime in any further on that topic, I was reminded by Vanessa Brown, who along with Kelly Clark invited me to participate in this. I want to thank you guys that we do have the chat box open. So if any of our participants have questions or comments, they're welcome to put them in the chat box. We're going to try and monitor them and answer questions as we go along to the extent that that works out. And if there's any at the end, we'll try and ask those too. Did anybody else have any other thoughts from the panel about what is diversity and sort of what are we setting off on discussing before we move on to the next topic? Cool. The next topic that's on our list is cultural challenges for people of color. And this is a subject that I'm going to talk about particularly because I've been working on an article that really deals with black people specifically. I think that's what many of us have been thinking about a lot this summer, particularly after the death of George Floyd. And what occurred to me was, as a trust and estates lawyer, why is it that we don't have more black people choosing to go into trust and estates? Why do we not choose this field? You know, I grew up on the south side of Chicago. The idea of being a lawyer was somewhat foreign. My parents were not college educated, so all I knew was if you worked hard in school, you could be a doctor or a lawyer or a professor. Those were sort of the range of options that were available. But drilling down any further in that really wasn't something that was in my ability at the time, and I didn't really know how to do the research to figure that out. As far as trust and estates particularly, though, is concerned, my parents didn't have a substantial estate. They weren't thinking about what they were going to leave to me, and I wasn't thinking about what I was going to inherit from them. It just wasn't part of our cultural conversation. And as I thought about that, and I thought about whether African Americans in particular, but other people of color who don't necessarily have lots of resources, ought to be thinking about trust and estates anyway, the fact is that many people find themselves in situations where they have disability or illness or conditions that affect their ability to make their own choices and decisions. It's also true that we're all going to die at some point, and so we should be prepared and should make sure that we've done what's necessary so that the people that we want to be in charge of our estates are factually in charge of our estates. All of that explains why everybody should have trust in estates, why everybody should have estate planning completed. But I think in particular, at least in my case, and I'll just give my example, I can't speak for everyone, I think about how African Americans were brought to this country with nothing, no ownership, no rights of ownership. We were property. We couldn't own property in the states where we were free. And even once we were able to obtain our freedom, in most cases, the idea of owning property was still challenged. To the extent that we actually acquired property on our own, there were many people who wanted to take that property from us. For a substantial period of American history, every 4 days there was a lynching that took place, and each one of those lynchings was not only a crime of terror against an individual, it was a crime of terror to a whole family and to a whole community and to a whole nation. It was a way of saying that you don't have the right as a human being to do what we can do. And woven into our laws, into Jim Crow laws that prohibited people from owning property, into racially restrictive covenants. We had the Federal Housing Administration, when it was allowing for loans to be made, limited African Americans' access to funds because we would be in redlined areas, so we were limited in where we could choose to go. And I think about Barack Obama at John Lewis's funeral, who talked about how John Lewis's mother told him, the things we put in your head, nobody can take from you. And I think about Michelle Obama, who was in my high school French class. She wrote about how her parents were mad at her because she didn't tell them about a possibility to go on a French trip, a trip to France, because she thought it was too much money and they shouldn't be worrying about that. And they said, you know, that's our decision to make that. You need to tell us about these opportunities and then we can decide. I went on the same trip and I had the same qualms about talking to my parents about it because it didn't seem like something that they should be spending their money on. And I know that my parents invested their energy and their time and their focus on what could come into my head, what I could have in my hands, what I could use as a tool, and not so much about making sure that there was going to be a bunch of money set aside for me, because that can be taken away. We have a long history of seeing that and understanding that and expecting that to be the case. So we're at a time now where those barriers, at least the legal ones that are most rigid, have largely fallen away, and we have the right and the ability to own and control our own property and to do what we want with it. That's one of the hallmarks of American jurisprudence, is the ability of individuals to choose how they're going to pass their property along. And so now is a moment for us to really focus on that, to think about that, and to know that this is as much a right for African Americans or Latinx people or Asians or people of any race or color to do. And it's part of our obligation, I think, if we want to make sure that the world continues to move forward and is bending the arc of history towards justice, is my motto. So those are sort of a little bit of background that I thought I would bring to the table and put out there. If anybody has any responses to that, you're welcome to chime in, my panel, or any other thoughts. Our next topic is on pipeline redevelopment and recruiting. And, you know, trusted estates, as we know, there are very few of us who choose this area. There are more of us, I think, in the real estate group, in the real estate side. But let's talk some about what are some of the ways that we can try and open the pipelines. I'll throw this to Danielle and Kelly O'Kelly, because you both have experience working with pipeline issues and from a broader perspective than just on trusted estates. How can we do better? How can we widen those pipelines so that we can find these opportunities?
I guess since I'm on camera, I'll go ahead and take that shot at that one first. You know, the real, I think the foundation, the root of the problem with the pipeline development is that nobody's really focusing on it. And this is an issue that can be focused on a firm, whether it be one attorney or 1,000 firms, based on my experience. And at one point I was a headhunter for the largest headhunting firm in the country. They continue to use the same strategies to find the talent for their organizations, and that is taking talent from other organizations, and rather than investing the time into building the next crop of people that can help increase the numbers. And one of the things that I'm really pleased to be working on this year at my current firm, Lowenstein Sandler, is we're doing some efforts that go further than just to developing law students and exposing them to areas that they might not otherwise be exposed to. We're actually reaching back as far as high school and working with an organization that will, over a 10-year time frame, give the kids exposure to different, you know, the law profession, you know, itself, as well as different practice areas, which is something that sorely needs to be done in order to keep everybody keep from continuing to go to areas that they're familiar with. You don't see a lot of trust in the state's attorneys on TV, and so that's where part of the issue lies. So it's really boils down to being dedicated and putting the resources in to mentoring and helping develop, you know, more talent instead of just relying on what naturally is developed.
Oh, Kelly, did you have any additional thoughts? Thanks, Danielle.
I think Danielle really nailed it. And the only thing I would just emphasize, and she mentioned this, is that you have to be intentional about it. It doesn't happen by accident. And it can't be one of these things that it's attractive one year and maybe the second year, and only led, whether it's within a law firm, by the individual personality that's maybe driving it. It has to be a firm commitment. It has to be part of the DNA. And perhaps, that's how it has to happen in large law firms. And I think about repurposing talent, encouraging, to your point about high school students, and reaching down even further. But I thought Danielle had some great suggestions on our panel as she was talking about lawyers who had decided to leave the practice of law, and maybe do some other things. And how do we sort of pull them back in to consider some of these other opportunities within a law firm? Because there are so many talented, diverse attorneys out there that no longer practice law on a daily basis. And they didn't leave because they didn't enjoy practicing law or didn't like a particular substantive area, but it was like opportunities or being able to find a mentor or opportunities. And I know Lindsay might hit on that a little bit with some of his comments later on. So as I look at the pipeline piece, I do think as I look at the legal piece, it's really important. And I think for like smaller organizations, whether solo firms or firms of maybe 10 or less, I think you have to be a little more creative in terms of reaching down and bringing in, whether it's middle school, high school students, internships, things of that nature, because it's the long-term play of it, to give them opportunity to understand what you do. I'm reminded of, different colleagues that they selected the law and internships that whether it was lobbying, legislative, government relations, whether it was litigation, whether it was tax for that matter, understanding that process. So it's incumbent upon us as practicing attorneys, small firm, large firm, to be able to reach out at the layer at college and below, because if you get into the law school piece, quite frankly, that might be a little late in the game in terms of, that pool already being set.
Yeah. You make the point, you and Danielle really make the point that the whole idea of pipeline is this is a across time process. And so we're trying to start earlier, getting people intrigued and interested in the possibility of practicing law and then in our practice areas. So, this is there is no end date on trying to improve the pipeline. It is an ongoing, constant thing. So as you say, Kelly, you can't just put it on the calendar, this is the year for pipeline, because once that's done, it doesn't have any meaning unless it's continually something that we're renewing and moving forward.
And Terry, I might just add the resources that you need to make sure you continue to commit on an annual basis. So whether you want to call it diversity budget, pipeline budget, or whatever, but you do need to dedicate some resources to get that done. And I do want to give a shout out to the ABA, because I mentioned Robert Gray, who, again, I was fortunate enough to serve on the ABA Board of Governors with, but Robert is leading an organization now similar to a pipeline organization, focusing on legal diversity scholars. And there's so many other organizations around the country that are doing work, which I know we will share to all the participants, so they'll be able to have access to some of these organizations as they are looking for interns and things of that nature to help start this process for them.
And just so that our viewers know, we actually have some resources, and we have the pipeline directory that's listed on the Rippity Fall webpage. You can check that out. I'm so pleased with the resources that we have. I was like stunned at the programs and the law firms and organizations that are all trying to do things to help give us some help with trying to improve the pipeline. Let's see, we have materials attached that include the pipeline directory from the ABA Pipeline Council, and it includes some of the organizations that are mentioned in the Q&A. So those are resources, look for those. Moving on, I like to call it a 360 review. And for me, when you're trying to make something change, when you want to do something different and evolve the world as it is, and it's informed in part by my Buddhist practice, you have to change yourself first. You got to go inside, figure out what in your head needs to be changed, and then you use that to change your environment and ultimately to affect change outside of yourself as well. And so what I like to do is to try to think of myself as sort of taking a 360 look. Stand where you are, look around, inform yourself with the kind of things that you need to know to make decisions and to take action. For those of you who are wondering how can I be anti-racist, or how can I, focus more on diversity and inclusion, and how can I recognize situations that perhaps exist that I haven't really focused on before. And so I'm just going to throw out some resources, things that I've been reading, and I would encourage you guys to consider this. There's Rochelle Riley's book, The Burden, which is a collection of essays about various ways that slavery has impacted African Americans in this country. There's Ta-Nehisi Coates, New Jim Crow, Michelle Alexander, and I've been reading a lot of Ibram Kendi lately, who has written about how to be an anti-racist and Stamped from the Beginning. Another example is Caste by Isabel Wilkerson. I can almost guarantee you that if you read one of these books and begin to see the way that racism in particular has infected our system and our culture, and the ways that we act and live our lives, no matter who you are, no matter what race you are, that will cause you to begin to wonder, how can I do something? How can I change? How can I help make the world a little better? And so you start from where you are, and you look around you, you open your eyes to what's there. What organizations are you a part of? How can you change that? If you only have friends who look exactly like you, maybe you should ask yourself, why do I only have friends who look exactly like me? And if I'm okay with that, am I still allowing the fact that I have this chosen circle of friends to affect my decision making? When I have two resumes in front of me, am I more likely to go with, the affirmation bias, the people who look like me, who are part of my sorority or my fraternity, or that I play golf with, or am I actually really giving consideration to someone else who may need this opportunity as well, who is just as qualified, but who doesn't quite cross that, yeah, they look like me and feel just right kind of way. So I think that's part of it, is looking around you, looking at your environment. How can you change that? How can you improve it? How can you make your life more diverse in addition to making your work more diverse? Let's see. Those are my thoughts.
Hey,
Yeah.
I just had a quick question. I was looking at some of the questions that have popped up.
Oh, yeah. Good.
And so, yeah, not to take your moderating duties, but I have the questions up in front. And maybe Danielle and Lindsay could kind of take a crack at this, because I think it's a really good question. And that is, any ideas on how to broach diversity and inclusion in firms that do not seem to be seriously motivated other than for business development opportunities? How did it start at your firms?
Well,
Go ahead, Danielle. I'll go after you.
You haven't spoken yet, Lindsay.
No,
so
please, Danielle, go. You know,
No.
once I start talking, I'll have a lot to say.
Well, I think if you can somehow convince them about reality, if they've done at least one or two, end of the year surveys by a client, completed an RFP or RFI, they should know that this is serious, that it's more than just, putting somebody on the pitch and never having, them heard from again. Clients are demanding, and that's both, in-house counsel as well as, private individuals are demanding diversity now. And so if you want longevity and sustainability in the legal profession, you're going to have to pay attention to this. It's not a fad. It's not going anywhere. And, the firms that wait to catch up, it's going to be tough. It's going to be really tough.
Thank you, Danielle. I agree with that. I have somewhat of a nuanced view on how we should tackle this at law firms. It's a big part of what I've been promoting in many of the discussions I'm participating in. So let's start off with this premise. I think we've messed up the way we've handled diversity at law firms for years and years and years and decades and decades. And it's not because the intent was misplaced. It's because I don't think corporate counsel have had a really good understanding of how law firms work, because law firms have been good at hiding how law firms work. And I also don't think that corporate counsel have realized the significant amount of power they have in order to move the needle with respect to diversity at law firms. So what do I mean by that? I'll make it really simple and really direct. I'm a litigator, so that's what I try to do. We've messed up by relying on old curmudgeoned majority types to move the needle with respect to diversity. It's not that they can't. It's not that they won't. It's not that some haven't done a great deal, but I think we've misplaced our priorities. Let me be more specific. I'm a Black man from the South Side of Chicago. Diversity is important to me because there's a lens in which I live through this world in that shapes my well-being, my life. You don't have to persuade me to hire other Black people or to get more diverse people involved in my matters or my cases or to give them opportunities, because I've lived on the other side of it. I know what the challenge is. So the fundamental mistake that I think we've made at law firms with respect to law firms is that we've directed origination credit, relationship credit to the wrong people. What we should do, instead of relying on law firms to do the right thing, is to make sure that diverse lawyers are receiving origination credit, relationship credit, because, and here's pulling back the curtain at law firms, that's where the power is at law firms. So many of our programs, I'll make it even more concrete, have focused on getting diverse lawyers busy. So what will happen is there's some relationship partner at my firm or any firm who would get an edict from a law firm and say, we want to see more diverse people on their matters. So you call Mr. Curmudgeon, and then he calls me and he says, Lindsay, can you help me with this matter? I get some hours, I go to trial, that's wonderful. But who is the most powerful person in that position? It's Mr. Curmudgeon. Now, if a client calls me directly and says, hey, Lindsay, we'd like for this matter to come in the firm through you, and we're gonna assist that you get the origination credit, then I am the most powerful person in that relationship, which means that when it comes to staffing and hiring and retention issues, then that's sort of built in the cake. So we need to stop trusting in law firms to do the right thing. Evidence shows us that law firms have felt that over and over again. We need a new strategy. And I'm advocating for a strategy wherein we really focus on origination credit, relationship credit, and focus that towards diverse lawyers.
And just kind of dovetailing off what Lindsay shared, that is a huge issue, whether you're an attorney of color or a woman in particular. But there are actual policies in place at most firms that allow this to perpetuate. It's referred to as fruit of the poisonous tree. And under that policy, if a client wants to work with Lindsay, wants him to get the credit, he can't get the credit, even if that business wouldn't have come to the firm but for Lindsay. Those types of policies need to be looked at with a diversity lens and stripped away and revamped. You don't have to take money from the people who've been making a ton of money, but you can do some reallocation and make it more fair. It'll impact retention, which will increase the diversity. It will impact leadership, and on and on and on. And so until we're willing to really drill down to the root of the issues, I could go on and on about them. There aren't going to be any solutions. And, I know we don't have a lot of time. If you don't have a diversity director, chief diversity officer, get one. Most often the people called upon to do the diversity inclusion work are the women on the women's committee and or the attorneys of color. So that's just one more administrative task that you're not going to get any real credit for, that won't allow you to go out and try to develop the business or bill the excessive number of hours you need to bill in order to move forward at the firm. So get someone who's experienced, and don't be afraid to hire outside of the legal profession. Most of the firms only hire people who have been attorneys, and I don't understand that. There is a lot of talent out there outside of law firms. Corporate America has been doing D&I a lot longer than law firms, so why not tap that talent too?
And I might just add, those are really good points. And if you are not hiring for a director of diversity, there are some really talented small businesses of former HR professionals, diversity professionals, where if you're a small firm, again, 10, maybe 10 to 20, 10 to 50 members, whoever, and you don't have that FTE position, you might consider bringing in somebody just to do a consult to say, look, I want you to look at how we're doing, to Lindsay's point, originations, compensation, all the significant decisions that are made in a law firm, and give them the opportunity to do a diversity audit or a comp audit, or to drill down to eliminate what we were talking about further, diversity, equity, inclusion. That equity piece is really what we're focusing on right now, which is removing those barriers to allowing some of the growth and expansion and seeding of our diversity efforts.
That's really helpful. And Danielle, you already talked some about this, I think, but I just wanted to give you an opportunity if you wanted to say anything else about how to identify people who are off track or re-engage them, and perhaps especially in the context of smaller law firms, because we've talked a lot about the big firm concept. Any thoughts on that particularly? I'm not pressing you, but we can go on, but I thought I'd throw it out there.
And I cannot remember the name. So there's an organization in Colorado, and it's for women who have went off track for family or whatever obligations. And I do not remember the name. I can shoot it to you, Terry, if anybody wants to get it after the fact. But they actually help place people who took a step out of big law for whatever reason and want to re-engage. And it also starts within your recruiting staff. I see resumes all the time that people pass on in whatever recruiting department I may have been with at the time, and it's because if they're not at a big firm and they left, there must be something wrong with them. That's the automatic assumption, and so I just encourage everybody not to just jump to that assumption. There is a lot of talent out there that leave for good reasons. It's not because they were a washout. Before jumping to that assumption, talk to the person. What's 30 minutes? Find out what their story is and give them an opportunity. I practiced for 13 years and I thought about going back into law, and so I played with it a little bit, but I'd been out for 20 years, but I was willing to take a haircut. I couldn't get in. I was a great associate, but nobody would take me because I stepped out. So there's talent out there. There are a lot of people that get hit by the recession. They never get back in. These layoffs that just happened, they never get back in, and it's no fault of their own. So don't use the subjective standards to determine who or who doesn't get interviewed. Take each person on a one individual basis.
Great. And we did have a question, and I think it sort of flows into our next comment, which is, what about this organization? What about organizations like ABA, RIPPD? And actually the next topic was going to be about some RIPPD initiatives that we're working on with ACTEC, which is, I think most of this group probably knows that ACTEC is a more selective organization. You have to be in practice for 10 years, and there's some other requirements. And so the pipeline is somewhat even smaller, because to the extent that we would be looking for people who came from RIPPD or from elsewhere, we are starting already with barriers to entry, 10-year requirement. You have to be speaking and writing and so forth. And so what I thought of as the diversity person with ACTEC was, how can we take advantage of the fact that RIPPD already has a fellows program, which requires that at least half of the participants who are supported through RIPPD every year to participate as going to meetings and so forth for 2 years. How can we in ACTEC leverage that? So we basically took their program and said anybody who graduates from the RIPPD Fellows Program who's a trust and estates lawyer automatically becomes what became the Dennis I. Belcher Young Leaders Program. Dennis is a former chair of this section and then was a president of ACTEC. He passed away a few years ago, but we named this after him so that we didn't have the resources to try to create that pipeline on our own within ACTEC. But we looked around and we found another program that worked well, that had those people who were already vetted and were ready to step into another opportunity, continue to connect with people in the practice area. And so now we have that program, and it's been going for several years, and we actually have ACTEC fellows who rose up from that program. So it's a way of trying to create and broaden that pipeline from within in the things that we have. I'm just going to dot through a few of these programs that are going on, because I think to the extent that those of you who are already involved in the section want to get involved or want to find out more about them, you can ask us about them and get involved. We have been having receptions with both ACTEC and RIPETI at our annual meetings so that we get to know one another. We're also instituting an outreach to historically black colleges and universities that we're working together with Kelly and Vanessa here through RIPETI. Members of ACTEC are working together, and to not tell HBCUs what to do, but to reach out to them and say, how can we reach out to your students and connect to them so that they're aware of what our organizations do and what it means to be a trust and estates lawyer and what it means to be a real estate lawyer. How can we open this door to create the relationships that will lead to expanding opportunities within the profession? We also have the Common Law Grant, which was in Portland. It just got started recently. Portland, Oregon had, I think it's the northwest area, many African Americans are losing their homes to gentrification. So there was a serious problem. How do we deal with that? Well, the Common Law Legal Center said, maybe if we can get a recent graduate who is African American, who is interested in trust and estates, we can get their employment funded through, in this case, a grant from the ACTEC Foundation and from other sources. That person is therefore learning trust and estates, they have a job in the field, and they're providing a needed service to the community that needs this work. I'm trying to figure, I'm telling you all this because I know you're out there around the country. If you have a legal services organization in your vicinity that you think should be a participant in this, let's talk about it. Let's figure out a way to use that same program elsewhere. And to the extent that you are one of our sponsors of RIPETI, law firms or any of your private financial sponsors, wouldn't you love to be involved in helping to support a new recent law grad who is trying to get the experience and training in trust and estates and watch their development as they grow into the practice? Isn't that a great investment of your dollars? Consider that.
Hey, Terry?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, this is okay. I just had a quick question. And we, just so you know, we didn't discuss this, but I'm curious. Recognizing, I grew up in the ABA young lawyers. And, obviously the litigation had fellows, RIPETI, employment, a number of them. And there was always the issue of funding, whether you could have one fellow or two fellows. I'm just curious, how has how have you guys done on retention of those fellows coming through that process? Going back to Danielle's point about pipeline and those things, because it always struck me was that there was always a bit of a gap between transition from young lawyer into the section. And usually the fellows, there was a better chance, I think when we looked at the data, of if you were a fellow, that you stuck with the section as well and kind of grew up in whatever. So can you speak to that? Or I'm not sure, but I just put that out because of your experience.
Yeah, I don't have the numbers specifically with me, but I can certainly come up with anecdotes that of people who have stayed with the program. And as I said, I think we have two fellows who are fellows in ACTEC right now who came up through the RIPETI Fellows Program. So I can point to at least those two examples and continuing ones who are coming through as well. And I think they also, because they're also supported through leadership in RIPETI, I know that they're actively involved in leadership in RIPETI, and I'm certain Stephanie can probably tell you about that, and Vanessa and Kelly as well. So that's a whole, I think it's an opportunity, and I think people are really taking advantage of it. So it's up to us to encourage people to do it and to find the young people or newer lawyers who can also be involved as well. And Robin Roy points out that we're doing very well. The former fellows are now on council and officers, and Robin says she'd say the majority of the people who participate in our fellows program actually stay involved and continue to go through.
That's great.
Hey, Terry, I got a question from somebody in the audience who I know well. Can I share it with you? And one of you might want to be able to answer it.
Mm.
Can one of you also address workplace progress of young attorneys? And this goes to the retention issue. How often an attorney of color doesn't work out or doesn't fit in when they're not coached to improve or given work?
Well,
Some
let me
senior
talk
attorneys
about that.
mean well, but they don't put what they need to into actually making sure you're successful.
Lindsay's
What-
got some stuff on that.
But yeah, let me talk about that for a little bit. So first of all, if the work is coming through a diverse lawyer, going back to my earlier point, then it's much easier, it's much more likely that a diverse younger lawyer will get work and stay involved. But I do think it's useful to sort of give the audience some context as to how challenging it is to be a young, diverse lawyer at a law firm. And I'll just talk about a few of my own personal experiences. Like Terry, I'm from the South Side of Chicago, went to a pretty good high school. I was fairly smart. I graduated well in my class. I went to the University of Illinois. I started there when I was 16. But there was so much that I didn't know. I stepped on the foot of my campus, and I remember seeing a campus called the College of Engineering, which I later found out had pre-admitted 4,000 or 5,000 students into the freshman class. And I remember standing there being confused, thinking, is there a college for janitors? Because the only engineers I had ever known or been aware of were engineers at my high school who cleaned the classrooms and that sort of thing. I did well at a pretty good school in Chicago, and I still didn't know. I didn't know what Northwestern was until I went to a football game and looked at the top of the stadium and saw the Big Ten flags and realized, oh, Northwestern, that's a school. And there were whole generations of people who were graduated from these institutions and been admitted into the College of Engineering. Fast forward to law firms. And Terry talked earlier about the cultural challenges. All of this matters because currently what we have at law firms are free flow systems for how you give work to people. It's basically, do I connect with you? Do I like you? That's how I give you work. Well, here's another example of a disadvantage. I remember being a summer associate, and it's, you know, it's sort of an anecdotal story, but it's just to provide some context. And being a summer associate, we go into a Cubs game, and after the Cubs game, we stop at a bar. And I remember being in a bar, and of course, I'm the only Black person, really, the only Black person. And everybody's talking, and I'm already a little bit uncomfortable. All of a sudden, a song comes on, and everybody starts singing the words. And then at a certain part of the song, everybody says, oh, 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 and they sort of dip down. And I remember just feeling so out of place. Now, that song was called Sweet Caroline. I never heard of it before, had no concept of what it was. Now, it seems silly to me, having been at a law firm and have seen that song so many times, but I couldn't relate. I couldn't relate. And that caused me to think about what sort of uphill battle am I in? And then I start to think, well, hey, if this law firm of 1,000 attorneys had 990 Black attorneys and there were 10 white attorneys, might it be challenging for those 10 white attorneys to make it to the top of that law firm? If we were at a reception and the Wobble song came on, how many people know what the Wobble song is? Or the Cha-Cha song came on, would they be able to fit in naturally? I mean, so that is the challenge. And when that is the challenge, you can't rely on natural free market in order to guide the paths of those who were underrepresented. You have to override the system. You have to say, look, I know you didn't go to Morehouse, but we're gonna find a way to work together. I know that I don't golf, but we're gonna find a way to work together. And so it's not a natural process. And too often in the legal profession, we think that things should happen naturally, but the evidence is there already. We don't need to measure this any further. When left on its own natural course, we fail with diversity over and over and over again. So what we should do is think strategically about how to override the system in order to get those younger people work, get them opportunities to be involved such that they stay engaged.
Yeah. Hey, I got to chime in really, really quick. And it all goes back, and if you take nothing else from this conversation, back to what O'Kelly said at the top of the program, intentionality. One thing that I've been trying to do at the last 3 firms I've been with, and I finally get an opportunity to do it, is to override that free market system at the firm. We have adopted a program, put a program in place whereby for your first 2 years at the firm, whether you're a newbie or a lateral, your work comes through a work assignment coordinator. The partners can't just go to, you know, the person they work last or next door to them, or and usually that looks like them. It goes through somebody who scans, you know, who has availability, who's worked on what, who needs experience in whatever area of the law that they haven't been exposed to get rid of some of the you know, opportunities that don't exist for some people. And you have to do that because it's such a vicious cycle. When you rely on that free market system, and usually it affects people of color the most, and then women, you start falling behind because you're stuck in doc review, or you're doing, you know, piecemeal research projects. You're not moving to the next level of your professional development. And then all of a sudden you're at the 2nd or 3rd year and you don't know how to do something when somebody gives you a project. And then it's like, oh, well, they're not a good fit. They can't make it here. And you go to another firm. And guess what? You come in with 3 years of experience, right? But you don't. You got 1 for real. And so then you don't do well there. So it's this vicious cycle. So until you level the playing field to who gets what work and what opportunities, nobody's going to get ahead. We're not going to solve these issues.
And am I? Oh, I'm sorry, Terry. Can I weigh in? Because this is good stuff right here. All right, so let's just take a. And Danielle and Lindsay are so on point. And here's what I want to add to that: the unconscious bias training that it takes when you do have individuals where you have diverse associates working with other partners in the organization. Because one of the things that we find, and we won't even focus on the unconscious bias with respect to interviews, but having associates, you know, there's been too many studies that have shown you can take the same memo and you will have an associate of color or Black associate wrote the memo, and they'll give it to a partner and it'll be marked up. And then you'll give the same memo from a white associate to that same partner, and it will not have as many red marks, not have as many comments and things of that nature. This has been done. So there's an unconscious bias. So I think it's important, as we are intentional, I think that's part of the ongoing training to make sure that when we are giving them these opportunities, we have partners who are giving them a fair opportunity to succeed and thrive and be successful in our organizations. And it's unfortunate when we don't equip our partners to be able to do that, whether it's on the mentorship, whether it's on unconscious bias kind of issues that permeate the workplace. But at the end of the day, and I know this sounds kind of simple, we really are talking about strong workplace practices, because these individuals are assets, right? We come in, we want to train them, we want to develop them. That's what you do with your human resource. And when you bring in that talent, and when you don't, I mean, what is the cost of your organization? There is a cost. And we need to get smart about that, because we don't allow that in any other aspect of our business, not in the financial aspects, not in intake, not in other HR aspects. So when you get your operational structure right, this should just be a part of that as well. It's that discipline to have that.
And I don't know how much time we have left, so I'm gonna give you a second word to take with you. Accountability. Intentionality requires accountability. And I shared a diversity scorecard that I developed at my firm, and I think it's part of your materials. If you have any questions about what does this mean or how does it work, call me. I think every firm should have something like it, or actually even take it to another level above. But it's already made a difference. I've been there 5 months and we're already seeing improvement. People, you know, they want to do well, and when you're tracking how they're doing, they up their game. So please, you know, refer to that, and I'm happy to be a resource if you want to try something similar where you're working.
That scorecard is amazing. And the other thing that you pointed out, which is work assignment coordinators, that isn't only a big firm thing. You know, we have a small firm, and we have one person who's responsible for assigning the work out to make sure that it's flowing reasonably to all the associates. So it's not only an issue in terms of diversity, but it's also an issue in terms of management. It helps you to make sure that you are not overburdening some people and underburdening others, and that the work is spread out in a fair way, in a way that's equitable, and everybody's getting similar levels of of training, so that you don't find out 6 years down the road that somebody never really got training in how to do a deposition because they were never given that opportunity. But if you have one person that it filters through who has an open mind and who is trying to make sure that they're avoiding, checking their biases, recognizing that they're there and checking them whenever they come up, that is another step that you have to do in order to make that work. I just want to throw in one other thing that goes back to a plan or a project. I was talking about my ancestor story, and I've used that as a tool for sharing around the country. I'm now working with a professor, Karen Box, who's a RIPETI member and an ACTEC fellow, to work on a curriculum for trust and estates that includes the story of my family's escape from slavery and how we can talk about property ownership and property transfers and race and gender and all of these issues that are essential to understanding what the law is and what the law can do. And the idea is to then take that same curriculum and scale it for college, high school, junior high levels. So at each level, we're talking about what's appropriate, age appropriate, so people are beginning to get the idea early on that it's important to think about the law. What does the law mean to us? What does it mean to own property? How does that define a person, what they own and what they can control? So, there are so many opportunities that we have to try to expand, and we just have to stop and take a moment, ask what we're doing and how can we do better, and use resources like what we've got, that's attached to these materials, and these, great people who know so much about how to do these things. Let me take another quick look. I know we're running out of time, although we were told we could go on a little bit longer. Our next item on the agenda, advancing, let's see, examples of how to give diverse attorneys, encourage in-house counsel to work with diverse attorneys at law firms, identifying and responding to workplace bias, and advancing diversity outside the workplace. I'm sort of throwing these out here as a potpourri.
Let me just say something to those lawyers who are at smaller firms or in smaller legal departments who think that they can't do anything. As passionate as I am, and that comes across, I can't help it when I'm arguing. That doesn't mean I'm not optimistic about what we're capable of and what we're doing and what we can do. I am very optimistic about that. And sometimes I think about the lawyers in smaller shops and the in-house lawyers at small legal departments who sort of feel like, this only applies to big firms and the big companies with massive budgets and that sort of thing. But I want you to think about all of that differently. Think about it in terms of the story that I gave you about myself. And that is, whether they're actually working at your firm or not, can you find somebody who is more vulnerable than you and help that person? So if you're a solo practitioner and it's just you and you have an assistant, can you find somebody at your church who's diverse, that you mentor, that you build a relationship with, and you give them an opportunity to learn, hey, I know what trust in the estates is. When I'm in high school, can you invite a colleague or somebody else in the ABA, somebody else in the committee who's diverse to your house for dinner? How many diverse folks have you had over your house for dinner or for lunch? Now, these seem like small acts, but all of these acts are important. And you can do that no matter how big your firm is, no matter how big your resources are, because if we all do a little bit, if we all stand up for somebody who's a little bit more vulnerable than we are, I think we can really help move the needle.
You're really talking about humanity, really recognizing the humanity of other people, and that allows you to cut through so much of what would be bias otherwise. I interrupted you, O'Kelly. You were going to say something?
Well, I was just going to follow up to Lindsay's eloquent comments and just sharing that there are other ways, not just the hiring, the pipeline, and some of the things we've been talking about, particularly for firms that might be smaller, to this point, smaller legal departments. But your vendor selection, how you go about sourcing some of those things, you purchase a lot to have your business running. and having those opportunities. Or there might be business development opportunities that you know exist that maybe you can't take advantage of, but what about reaching out to a diverse attorney or a diverse professional to give them opportunities? Because as we've talked about, partners who are thriving, particularly diverse partners, they tend to work with diverse associates. They tend to hire more diverse associates. That just tends to happen that way. So there are other things that we could do. And I'll just take this a little bit outside the legal arena, and that is in my role as chair of Virginia Retirement System. Many of you who might be commercial real estate lawyers on the phone, we probably invest maybe about about 30% of our portfolio is all real estate. REITs, other private equity funds that focus on real estate as well. And we don't have a mandate, but the board is committed to making sure we have more diverse asset managers, because there's a shortage, but also mentoring them and then requiring our asset managers to have diversity within our organization. So we're actually using, let's say, our heft a little bit to make sure we're getting that. And the reality is that when you look at some of the data, the returns that we're getting from our diverse asset managers exceed what we're receiving from organizations like BlackRock, Apollo, Carlyle Group, many of the large ones you hear, but they're women and minority private equity hedge funds and things that we invest in that have higher returns than them consistently after multiple firms. So this is not a social experiment that we're talking about. I hope you don't think that you sat with us for this hour and think that we're trying to force you into it, or we think it's a social experiment. It makes good business sense. If you look at the talented and the pool of talented individuals out there, if you want to benefit your business, I think it's a great way to do so.
Absolutely, and you know, there are statistics out there that show that if you were truly having people make decisions that are, I hate to use the word colorblind, because that brings in a whole idea that somehow people can truly be colorblind, but as you pointed out with the work that was done blind, or with resumes that are blind, that there are statistics that point out that we are losing out in America on great opportunities, you know, voices and experiences that diversity is all about. I mean, that's what this is about, is opening the door to ways of thinking and through experiences that help to enhance the entirety of these institutions and organizations. We only have I think we have five, let's see, we have a couple more minutes before concluding wrap up, and my mic just went out. Does our panel have anything else?
I just want to say real quick, as far as the lack of attorney of color diversity in the trust and estates area, I'm shocked and amazed. I used to do a law day program with high school students, and they were all African American Black kids. And we would expose them to different practice areas, and then we would, you know, at the end of the day, do a little survey. Every year, trust and estates was their favorite topic because they can relate to it. It's just, it goes back to what Lindsay said, lack of exposure. And if somebody was just to take one of those kids, and, you know, everybody in the, I don't know how many people are in the audience, but if each one just took one person under their wing, we probably have too many trust and estates attorneys. So it's incumbent upon each and every one of us to do what we can to not only expose, but to mold, you know, future people in the area.
That's right, Danielle. Any other final comments from Lindsay or O'Kelly before I wrap up?
Thank you. I'm glad to have had this conversation with you all, and I've seen some of the comments come through the chat. Thank you so much. And feel free to reach out to any one of us. We will help you in any way that we can, including pointing people to you directly. So thank you for listening and participating.
Yeah.
I echo the sentiments of my panelists, and particularly Danielle. Thank you for sharing the D&I scorecard. That was very generous, and just so you know, we have your permission to use it internally, and we know you'll be checking with us as well. But I think this was a really great panel, and more importantly, I enjoyed the preparation sessions as we got a chance to kind of share some of best practices, thoughts, And as Lindsay said, if there are participants out there, you want to follow up, we're happy to talk about this because we're passionate. It's not just something that we're thinking about doing and we just happily serve on a panel. This is what we do and we want to see more growth.
Well, thank you. And we had a nice comment from Bruce Tannehill who said, look, I'm a white guy and this has been eye-opening to me to begin to think about these things in a different way. And I was just going to throw in that I attended a webinar yesterday. It was a Hollywood producer, an African-American guy who did Queen and Slim, and he was talking about anti-racism in Hollywood and how can we try and do this. And he said, look, we don't have the numbers as black people to change this. We don't have the numbers and the power to affect this in the way that it needs to happen. If you care about trying to create a diverse world, a world that everybody has the opportunity to experience these opportunities and to grow, and if you're really caring about human beings and trying to make sure that they have the opportunities, then it's incumbent on people who aren't the people who are the minorities, the people who aren't the people who are in the wheelchair and who need access. We are counting on the people who are in the positions of power to make room, to see that we're here, to hear us, and then to make change. So I want to thank our panelists who've been so awesome today. Thank you so much. And as you said, this was a great experience getting to know you and work on this panel together, as well as Kelly and Vanessa, who I've loved for years already anyway. So thank you guys so much for this opportunity.